Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Malcolm Maestrel and I'm a Membership Services Coordinator with IAAP. Thank you for joining us for the second webinar of our 2023 and Accessibility Journey mini-series. We're excited to continue the mini-series with today's webinar, The Journey Begins, Why Accessible Content is Everyone's Responsibility. But before we begin, we have a few general housekeeping items to go over. Closed captioning is provided. To enable closed captioning, select the CC icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. The stream text links for English, French, German, Spanish, and Swedish will be posted in the chat as well. American Sign Language interpretation is also provided, and microphones are muted to prevent any background noise or disruptions. We ask that all attendees please post your questions in the Q&A. Questions will be saved until the end of the presentation. The chat will be monitored for general dialogue and technical issues, and today's webinar will be recorded and available in our webinar archives, and we will send out a copy of the recording and presentation to everyone who registered. And now I'd like to turn today's program over to our presenters, Jeff Adams and Michele Lucchini.
Thank you, Malcolm, and welcome everybody. So today we'll focus on the accessibility of our contents and the importance of this aspect of digital accessibility. Before we start, we would like to take the opportunity to introduce ourselves. And Jeff, do you want to start?
Absolutely. Thanks, Mick. I'm Jeff Adams. I'm the Director of Accessibility Operations with UsableNet. So I'm advising companies around the world on their best practices around digital accessibility. I've been with UsableNet more than a decade now. And in addition to the work I do there, I'm also a creative entrepreneur. And content is such a passion for me and for Michele that together we co-wrote a book called Content for Everyone, which is actually a book we put together for other creative entrepreneurs who are often working on their websites solo. You know, they might be just standing up their own website and they don't know anything about content accessibility. So we're passionate enough here that we wrote that book for them. Mick, over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. And I'm Michele Lucchini. I'm the Vice President for Delivery and Accessibility Operations here at UsableNet. I have been working at UsableNet for about 23 years now. And my focus, together with Jeff and the rest of our team, is to hold our clients' hand, defining and planning for that accessibility journey that is all focused on making accessibility a sustainable requirement. In these 20+ years of work in the accessibility and the digital transformation space, we did a lot of experience, so we know how potentially complex a requirement like accessibility can be. We know which are the challenges that everyone faces, and yeah, our work is also concentrated on providing the solutions on making accessibility actually something doable. Today's goal will be making sure that we are all aligned regarding the fact that accessibility, it is not just a development responsibility like we are all often thinking. We'll provide a high-level overview of the items that the content teams are responsible for, obviously in relation to the guideline that we have as a reference, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guideline. We'll touch the aspects related to the necessity of seeing accessibility as a requirement instead of looking at accessibility as a project. And then we'll do some consideration around trainings and tools for content teams. So let's start focusing on the importance of content in the digital accessibility. I can guarantee that we do not discuss content enough when we talk about digital accessibility. Everyone is so focused on structure, everyone is so focused on resolving the development related or the design related aspects. And we do not concentrate enough on actually the massive contribution that inaccessible content can provide. This is also confirmed by the fact that many success criteria of the Web Content Accessibility Guideline are actually related to, primarily related to the content of our website. To support this thesis, in this slide, there is a pie chart showing the percentages distribution of the responsibility across the web content, the WCAG, so the Web Content Accessibility Guideline. If we consider the standard 2.1 AA, 29% of the success criteria are related to content. Then we have a 34% of the criteria are involving the design team, and 37% of the criteria are involving the development team. Obviously, there are criteria in the Web Content Accessibility Guideline that require a collaboration across multiple teams. For simplicity, we identify these main three teams, so content, design, and development. If we look to the raw numbers, these other pie chart that it is present on this slide shows that on a total of 50 success criteria related to the Web Content Accessibility Guideline 2.1 AA, 24 are related to any team that is not a content team, and there are 26 criteria that require the content team attention. So this is this means a lot. So immediately I realize the importance of this topic in the landscape of making a digital property accessible. And we have more data to share. So we have reviewed and analyzed a representative sample of 100 audits that we performed this year. These 100 audits were distributed as follows. So 39 were related to e-commerce website, 37 audits were related to corporate or mainly content websites. And then we have 24 booking websites for airlines and accommodation. And we notice an interesting data that is shown in this slide. So here we have a bar chart that shows the percentage of the issues that are related to the content. So on the e-commerce side, 38% of the issues that we reported were content team responsibility to be resolved. On a corporate or mainly content side, 58% of the issues that we reported were content team responsibility to resolve. And on booking sites, 26% of the issues were content related. So again, numbers are supporting this focus on content together, of course, with focus on design and development. And content is really everywhere. If we think about your digital presence, that could be website, apps, marketing emails, social media, multimedia contents like videos, audios, PDFs, everything requires also the content accessibility. And consider a diverse way to also reach your customers through multiple channels. The consistency is also fundamental. The consistency of your communication, which obviously should result into an accessible communication, it should be also a crucial aspect. So let's now dig into further details around what is the content team responsibility. So what content creators can usually control. This might depend on multiple factors: the way you're structured, the size of your organization, the platform you use. So there are multiple aspects that contribute defining the case-by-case responsibility of the content team. So here we are summarizing everything that typically it is part of the content team responsibility. So first of all, images and videos, followed by the structure of the content on every page of your website or native apps. The clearness of the content, so clearness of communication, the use of colors, and also together with this, any aspect related to the color contrast. And we'll also make, at the end of this session of the presentation, a few additional considerations. With that said, I would like to pass the ball to Jeff that will walk you through some of the aspects related to the responsibility of the content team.
Thanks, Mick. And it's important to note on those few bullets that we had on the previous slide that, as you can imagine, that's just a small handful of what the content creators can have control over. When you think about the number of success criteria that Michele showed earlier, those few bullets are just a few, and we pick these because they highlight some of the most, what we would consider the most important areas because of the areas that they touch. But there are certainly more than what we're about to go through here. We're going to start with images and videos. So, of course, with images, you always have to provide a meaningful alternative text. It describes the function of the image within the context that's surrounding it. And that's key here, is that when we're looking at the context, because it may not actually be a description of the image, but more what's important about it in terms of that context. You also have to think about that you may actually want to ignore the image in case there's no meaningful context there. So it's a decorative image and you would leave an empty alt attribute. The definition of that image alternative does have a kind of a specific decision process around it. And we can look at that here in the next slide. So what I have on screen right now is a magnifying glass icon. What would the image alternative be for this? Think, of course, that the icon can very often be used to represent a search button or something similar, like we see here on the Google website. The Google website in the search bar has that magnifying glass icon. And so in that case, the image alternative there should be something like search, or even Google search or something like that, because it's the important representation here. To have an alternative text there that might just say magnifying glass isn't really meaningful at all, because it's, again, that context that matters. Now, if you were to look at a product display page, we've got a larger image here of a boot and several other images that are sitting in the carousel. For this large image of the boot, this could easily be considered a decorative image because there's so much information about the boot already on the screen. And just to have, just say, here's the Danner Mountain 600 leaf gore text hiking boot, then you're being redundant to information that's already on the screen. Thinking about this, there's a couple other things to note here too. There may be instances where this very same image of the boot might appear elsewhere on the site. And in those places, maybe it does need alternative text because you're going to be describing something specific about the boot, its function, its features, where it's not already represented on the page. So you can't think that you're going to have a single alternative text for each and every image that you have. It's probably going to have different alternative text based on its location. This is also why you can't rely on artificial intelligence or AI generated text, because that is only going to be looking at the image itself and not considering the context. Most likely, if AI was to generate this, it would be something equivalent to boot or maybe brown boot, but it wouldn't give the rest of the context.
Before I let you go on, Jeff, this is also another interesting aspect in this example. If we just concentrate on the magnifier lens, it is exactly the same image of the search. So often teams tend to apply consistently across the site, like robotically, the same alternative text. So we could have something that says, all right, so for every page, the magnifier lens alternative text will be search. But obviously, search doesn't apply to the magnifier lens on this, on the example of the boot, because that actually is the zoom. So the function of the magnifier lens, the lens, is not the search, is the zoom. And highlights the importance of somebody from the content team that understand the context and associate the correct and meaningful alternative text to that specific image.
Yeah, that's a great addendum. Thank you for that. Images of text. These are one of the things we talk about in our work all the time because there's such a reliance on images of text, especially in, for marketing and promotion. But images of text are never accessible. There's an entire success criterion that says that they're not, except in some very specific circumstances. And so we really recommend to avoid them if possible and have images alongside live text on the screen to leave all the text as live text. But if you have to use them, you must also consider making sure that there's equivalent text available as live text on the page itself, so adjacent to the image, or as part of a social media post if you're doing that. Consider also that most of the social media platforms, especially Facebook and Instagram, they will use AI generated text if you don't put alternative text there. So really important to make sure that those alternative texts, especially when you're using images of text, are filled with the information you want conveyed. If you've got that equivalent text in place, and again, it doesn't have to be exactly redundant, just equivalent, then you're making the content available to be understood by the widest number of people, even while you may continue to have that success criterion fail because you do have an image of text there. And then if you're using images of text, make sure that text in the image is as visually readable as possible. Follow color contrast rules. Make sure the background, there's not too much background going on around it, and that there's not too much text in that image as well. Pre-recorded videos. So many people use YouTube, Vimeo, they're embedding videos in the pages. You need to provide a title to that video that actually describes what's playing in that video. In the case that there's audio present, you need to make sure that there's captions for the dialogue, along with any sounds that are important to the understanding of that video. This is another place you don't want to use AI to let you auto-generate the captions, because often those will generate captions that don't have good punctuation, good capitalization, perhaps completely wrong words that will give the unintended meaning. So you need to take the time to edit any captions that are auto-generated. In addition, you need to provide the audio description for anything that's appearing on screen and any actions that are important to the video's message. It's often easier to make sure that those are integrated into your audio script so that you're not having to figure out how to add a secondary audio track or provide additional description. You'll notice even in this presentation, we're giving you the equivalent information to everything that's on the slides, so that if you're not engaging with this as a visual participant, you're still getting all the information. So those are important things to think about when you're doing videos. And when you're doing live videos, such as we have here, have a captioner present, or at least make sure that there are auto captions running at that point that you may clean up later when you're doing a replay. So next up, we're going to talk a little bit about content structure, because how you structure the content is key to how people might be able to understand it. That starts with page titles. You need to provide a unique title for every single page on the site. No page should have a duplicate title, because that can be confusing for users who are trying to understand where they are on the site. That title should provide information about the scope and the content of the page. If you're in the middle of a flow, like a checkout flow, it should indicate the step of that flow if it's applicable. And it should always have the name of the company or website, so that people, again, understand where they are. Some examples here include using like shipping details, and then a pipe delimiter, and sandwich and company, which would be the name of the website. Or for a flow like in checkout, step 2 of 3, pipe delimiter, the pipe delimiter, and then sandwich and company. And that delimiter can be a pipe, it can be a bullet, it can be a dash, whatever it is, but you just want to be consistent with it as well. You also want to think about the reading order and how people read the page. Of course, in English, we typically read left to right and top to bottom. But if you're moving content around the page or wanting people to read different things in different areas, it can be confusing when trying to understand the order to intake the content. You also want to make sure that any important elements are actually positioned before something that is secondary, or something that needs to be completed before they do something else. A great example of poor accessibility is if there's important information or messaging that is positioned after a submit button. An example I've seen recently with a transportation company that I work with is that they actually have the indicator that someone is going to be, if somebody is a disabled passenger who might need assistance, the checkbox to indicate that actually comes after the book now button. So somebody might miss that and move right on to booking a trip without triggering that button if they needed it, or that checkbox if they needed it. So important to think about that in the reading order. Headings are so key, especially for screen reader users. Screen reader users often rely on headings so that they understand the content of the page and the layout of a page, where somebody who's interacting visually can very quickly scan any bold or large text. Proper usage of the H1 through H6 hierarchy guarantees that you've got an order set up that reflects the relationship between the different content areas of a page. I often think of this as a headline, or an outline rather, to the content itself. And it makes me think of like my high school days where we were doing term papers and had to produce the outline that started with the Roman numeral 1, went to a capital letter A, went to a regular numeral 1, and move through the hierarchy that way. I think of this the same way. So you need to think about structuring the content correctly so that it's easily readable and understandable by everyone. This includes thinking about the amount of headings that you have to the actual content on the page, and keeping a good ratio there as well, because you may want to break up the content a little bit more so you don't have too much between headings. And of course, it's important when you're using H1 through H6 that you're using it as the semantic scope that it's meant for organizing the content and setting up these headers, rather than using it as a style option to make content larger with different colors, or even to leave blank lines to get the line height that would be represented by one of these. That could be very confusing to users if the H1 through H6 is misused. So you want to use it correctly, and for any style considerations, to actually use proper CSS markup for that. Clear content. This would seem to be kind of a given, but there is the whole WCAG principle around being understandable, and certainly creating clear content plays right into that. Here we're talking about using good textual labels. for links, and for buttons, so that everybody understands the meaningfulness within the context of what that link and button is meant to do. You want to describe functionalities in very clear and concise ways. So if you're thinking about a logo that's going to sit up at the top left of the screen, the company logo, you're not going to want it to say, for example, UsableNet logo. You're going to want that alternative text and label in that case to be UsableNet homepage, because that's where that will go if somebody clicks on it. You want to stay away from any spatial indications, because you don't want to say click the button on the left, for example, because some users aren't going to be able to understand where the left is for whatever reason. Same thing with any sensorial indication, such as click the green button. Green isn't going to be perceived by everybody, so it'd be better in those cases to be very specific about what people are clicking on. Are you clicking on a link that says homepage, or go to my or my account, or something very clear in your link text? An area where you may not have direct control, but you may actually advise on it, is around error management. You may be asked to create content around instructions or labels or error messages to help people understand what they need to fill out, the format to fill it out in, to provide error messages that provide clear information about the error, and how to resolve it. So this is an area, you're probably not putting this content into a CMS, but you may actually be asked, or even suggest yourself to be able to go advise on the error management. Use of color and color contrast is also a big consideration. You want to use color wisely. And while this is usually a design team responsibility as the site or the email template is being laid out and created, it's certainly something that content creators might be able to adjust when they're creating content and putting, making color choices within the CMS itself. It's so important to understand that not all customers are going to perceive color in the same way. Could be color blindness, could be low vision, could be somebody not visually interacting with the site at all. You may have someone with a cognitive disability, for example, and they're not going to understand what the meaning of the color is. It also might not be enough to distinguish between two elements that are on the page in some cases, which is where the color contrast will come into play here in just a moment. But this is why you don't want to rely on color only. You don't want to have, for example, all fields in red have an error, please correct it, because that red might not be perceivable. So it's more important to highlight these things in either a different way or in multiple ways. You might have red and another form to show something is wrong, to help people understand. And let's move on to talk about color contrast now, because these are such important rules for us to consider here. As you know, the color contrast is that regular text must be 4.5 to 1 color contrast ratio. There's a number of tools out there that can help you make sure you get that. But doing correct color contrast ensures that the users are going to be able, if they are visually interacting, that they'll have the best opportunity to be able to actually read that text. And as I wrap up this section, there's a few additional considerations to think about that I want to highlight, particularly around social media and emails. You want to have a limited use of emojis. Screen readers have a very specific way that they will read out each emoji, and it may or may not actually be what you want that to present to someone who might be using assistive technologies. It's possible that some may not understand the emoji use in the context that you're providing it in. So if you're going to use them, make sure that they're not trying to convey meaning, that perhaps they are just decorative. And most importantly, don't stick them in between words, because that can make those words much more difficult to parse. When you're using hashtags, make sure you're using Pascal or camel case. So that would be either where all of the words start with a capital letter, or where all of the words after the first word start with a capital letter. This makes the hashtag much easier to parse for all users. It also ensures assistive technology has a better chance to represent it correctly, because it will typically start the idea of a new word at each capital letter. Beware of platforms as well, such as Instagram, that when it autofills captions, it will actually try to autofill them using lowercase only. So make sure that you're actually using Pascal or Camel and not just going with the ones that it suggests. You also want to follow all of our other content accessibility recommendations. So on social media and email, think about the uses of images of text, for example, or within email, following good color use and items like that. And also be aware of the image to content ratios, especially in emails. I see too many emails going out that are just full of images of text, often without proper alternative text on those images, which would mean anybody with a screen reader or who has, might be blind or low vision is going to be totally removed from being able to interact with those. Be more inclusive and keep a good balance of images versus live text content to help ensure everybody's engaging with your messages. PDFs are important too. Your PDFs have to be accessible so that the content can be available to the widest possible audience. Following all the content accessibility guidelines is a great place to start. Again, things like making sure you've got alternative text. If there's images of text, have that live text available. Follow those guidelines, but also use tools that are available in platforms like Adobe Acrobat for PDF accessibility checking and fixing, so that if you are using those, again, you're going to have the best chance to reach the entire audience that you'd like to. And where possible, consider not even using PDFs and actually creating web pages for that content that have live text whenever possible. And with that, I'm going to hand back over to Michele to talk about action and process.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, I think that we are approaching now the last part of this presentation, and we want to focus on action and processes. There are, if we think about the content team involvement, we can easily see content aspect fitting into every major step of the software development life cycle. So what is, in generic terms, the set of all the processes regulating the activities around your digital properties. So starting with the plan and design, starting with the definition of the content and the implementation of the content, obviously, testing the content and testing the features, and then the deployment and all the tests that are happening around the deployment, before or after. I would also like to take an opportunity, now that we are talking about process, just making a comment around what you have been hearing from us today. So I think that one of the messages that can be read between the lines of what Jeff said is that obviously accessibility is a topic related to doing many actions. We have clear actions for the developers, clear actions for the designers, clear actions for the content, but that is not enough. Accessibility is also related to influencing others. The design team, together with doing aspects that will satisfy specific success criteria, will also have to influence who comes later, potentially the development team, around providing specific requirements on how to implement something in order to meet certain accessibility requirements. The same applies with the content team. The content team might not be able to modify some of the aspects that Jeff mentioned, but should feel the responsibility of communicating internally what needs to be done. We are talking about a new set of responsibilities. We are also talking about potentially a new set of tools or functionalities that you need to have on your infrastructure in order to allow you to annotate, communicate, and list all these requirements. Connected to this aspect, it appears clear the importance of training. So making sure that everyone, I mean, today we are focusing on content, so let's talk about content team. So making sure that the content team receive the proper training is crucial. And also, it is crucial to identify which are the tools that the content team can use in order to perform the checks that we have described today. And do not forget to document the way that your processes will need to change in order to accommodate and include these additional steps, additional milestones related to the content accessibility checks, remediations, or additional requirements. When we think about the actions, when we think about the processes, there isn't really a big differences between what a small company should do, what individuals should do, what big size companies should do. It is just a matter of understanding the real requirement and implementing the most efficient way to do it. For sure, if you keep defining content as you always did, and then you wait the end of the whole process to do an accessibility check, and then you go back to the content definition table and to remediate, it will not be sustainable. That can work for the first time when you need to remediate, for example, an existing digital property. But suddenly it will appear not efficient at all. So it is fundamental to make it a requirement, to make it a baseline expectation. So you train, you know how to make accessible contents, and the final accessibility check related to content will also be the validation. And in case that will spot any error, most likely that will be as any other bug. So you will already have the tools, you already have the knowledge to address it, resolve it in a timely manner. Be aware about the platform you use. That's important. I just alluded to that before. There might be things that you cannot do because maybe your content management system doesn't allow you to do. In the past, there were content management systems that were not providing the option of setting an empty alternative text for images. So you want to have the option to specify an empty alternative text for images, resulting to a specific code on your website that allows people to ignore the image, people using assistive technologies such as screen readers. So being aware about the technology, the infrastructure you use, it would also help you to require changes. Knowing what you have to do will give you an option to provide indication on which will be the aspects that will fulfill your need as content creators. The same applies to the email marketing platform you use or the social media platforms or schedulers you use. And also, in case you are reliant on third parties, let's make sure that your accessibility requirements are transferred to your third parties. And I don't think that we could emphasize more the importance of talking about accessibility within your organization. Accessibility is a quite young topic in the majority of organizations we are talking to, and finding champions is one of the best way in order to start distributing an accessibility culture within your organization. And that could be based on examples, experience that you do remediating your website, personal knowledge that you gather while you train yourself or you start reading about accessibility. It is important to share these thoughts. It is important to, like I said before, focus on resolving the specific instance, but also thinking about the plan. It might be usually it's easy to resolve the accessibility issues on that specific element of that specific page. It is a little bit more complicated to understand how I will make sure that similar conditions, similar scenarios will not present again. So talking about accessibility internally, making sure that everyone knows what's the effort, what's the requirement, what's the plan of the company, is the first step to succeed in this task. In terms of next step, Jeff, do you wanna cover this?
Sure, happy to take this one. So first of all, and this really all ties back to our goals, you want to make sure that you and the content team, you might be the content team potentially, or that the content team you work with, know that they've got a responsibility for accessibility and that it should be considered a requirement. It can't be a nice to have accessible content. It needs to become a requirement within the organization. As you're doing that, you need to make sure the content creators have access to training and to tools to support the accessibility work that they have to do. I teach people about accessible content all the time through UsableNet, helping to really help them understand, all of the things that go into accessible content beyond just the small subset that we kind of presented here as kind of a high level look. And there's tools out there to help too. There are, some of these elements can be detected by accessible, doing automated scans rather, and that's only some of them that can be done that way, but you have tools like UsableNet's Aqua platform that can do that. There are tools like color contrast checkers. There's a number of those that are out there in the world to help you make sure you have good color contrast and elements like that. You also have to consider the content creation and the accessibility requirements at each step in the process, whether you're creating a website, an app, an email message, or what you're putting on social media. It should be considered from the very moment you start ideating on something through the content creation process, and as it goes, it being inserted into whatever platform it needs to be in. And as Michele mentioned, share the knowledge you have with others. Start talking about what you've learned here today with your colleagues. I would say even with your friends, because I would extend the idea that content is everyone's responsibility to really everyone who's putting content on the internet. Even if all you're doing is putting content on social media, in your personal life, that content should be as accessible as possible. So if you start to propagate this knowledge out with your colleagues and your friends, we can all make, work towards a more inclusive web for everyone, to make sure that they're being able to engage with whatever content they want to.
All right, so yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I think we can move into our Q&A. Just a quick note, we're happy to take questions even after we're done here. So you can reach us at jeff.adams@usablenet.com and Michele@usablenet.com too. We do have a couple of questions that have come into the Q&A. The first one says, could you provide a better, more accessible option instead of having text that says, click the button below? So I would say something like, use the submit button below. I would even keep the below in that case, because there's going to be people who are engaging visually where the below will help them. But by saying use the submit button below, you've now labeled what that button is. So people who aren't able to understand the spatial orientation can now be, searching out that submit button. And I actually changed click to use, because in that case, not everybody is going to necessarily be clicking. There could be people using voice control, people doing other things besides clicking. I mean, even on a mobile device, we don't click the tap. So changing that method this way is a better way to make that accessible. Is there anything else you would do with that, Mick?
Just a couple of trivial comments, making sure that the label of the button is actually submit if you are referencing in the label. And other alternative ways instead of use is activate, interact with, other ways just to avoid to mention an action that potentially some user could not perform.
Next question. I get your point about the potential issues with emoji use, as they can be interpreted differently by different people. Would you recommend avoiding symbols in email correspondence? Often they are employed to make emails feel more approachable. Do you think using written descriptions of feelings enclosed in parentheses might be a more successful approach to this? The way that I think about that when I'm thinking of emails or even social media posts is that I would look to use the emojis in a way where they're purely decorative. So you're not trying to convey something important in the message or the primary message through the emojis. That way, if someone doesn't understand the emoji, they didn't miss something, for whatever the representation was there. Because I know it's going to be hard for marketers and just people who are posting on social like to get away from emojis. They're a great way to convey some emotion. So I would say between the messaging itself, trying to convey whatever emotions you want somebody to engage with, and then maybe punctuating it with a single emoji, maybe two at the most, can be a way to do that. So, you're still having the emoji use, but you're also thinking about how it might be perceived by everyone.
There is only one thing that I would add, and to add that, I would like to tell everyone a story that I've been told, so hopefully he's actually telling the truth. Time back, in Japanese, the word accessibility didn't exist. And it was translated with common sense. And I think that this should be probably the way to look at these aspects. In order to have common sense and take a decision on the emoji, I think it's fundamental to understand what is the different ability user experience in case there is an abuse of emojis. But at the other end, let's not prevent any other user to actually benefit from the emojis. So finding the right way, applying the common sense is fundamental in accessibility. So we don't want to say, stop using the emojis. That would be a wrong message. But use the emoji in a mindful way is the right trajectory. In order to be able to understand what is the mindful way, it is important to know what accessibility is, to know how the screen reader behaves, and which are the expectations of the users that need a screen reader, for example, to browse a website.
Next question. Should links always be underlined, or is during hover okay? I've seen it different ways and curious about best practice. For me, the best practice here is to underline. It would be possible, for example, if someone is maybe colorblind or maybe has some other visual impairment, that perhaps they're not going to understand that something's there to even be hovered over if they're navigating with a mouse. Of course, if they're navigating by keyboard or other methods, they're going to come across potentially in another way. But that can't always be the case. So to make sure that the links are perceivable by the widest audience possible, I would say it has to be underlined. And I say that even knowing that, it's not all UI UX designers like to underline because of how that looks on a page. But I think it's really necessary for the best perceivability possible.
Yeah, definitely the underline is the most popular way to distinguish links from the rest of the content. The guideline requires actually to make them distinguishable from the rest of the content. So it is not mandatory. It is definitely a best practice. And let's also make sure that in case you are using a keyboard, the links as any other interactive element of your page have a focus indicator visible. So something surrounding a border surrounding the interactive element when selected using the keyboard.
Next up, I am using a website platform that currently does not support decorative images. Do you have any recommendations for how to handle this situation? This leaves you in a position a lot like the position folks are in with Facebook and Instagram, where they're forcing everybody to have alternative text, and that they'll fill the alternative text with AI generated text if there's not text that's put into it. So in this situation, you're going to have to create meaningful text for that image, even if it duplicates what's on the page, because I don't think you should do something like, this image is decorative or something like that. You're going to have to provide a meaningful solution, a meaningful alternative for it within the context of the page again, and it may just be equivalent to other text that you've already got on the page.
Yeah, in this case, I mean, you should ask your development team help. There are alternative ways to allow the screen reader to identify the image as cosmetic in case you cannot use the alt attribute. And Jeff, I think that we skipped one question.
I did. I actually, the screen moved as I was reading and I lost my place. Do you recommend any third-party sites for accessibility testing or appraisal or product/web documents? So I want to make sure I'm parsing the question correctly. It sounds like third-party sites for accessibility testing. Certainly here at UsableNet, we do have a platform that we make available to run accessibility testing on websites. If you're talking about web documents, there are a number of companies out there. I don't have any particular recommendations, and I don't know if you do on PDFs, Mick, but there's a number of companies out there that can help you understand more about PDFs, how to create them accessibly, and how to remediate the ones that you already have as well.
Yeah, and in case the question was related to web pages, yeah, I mean, we have our proprietary platform that we built, which is called UsableNet Aqua, that is suitable for testing for accessibility. This also gives us the opportunity, I think, to make a quick comment around how much you can rely on test automation to test accessibility. The reality is that it is definitely relevant, but the majority of the success criteria of the Web Content Accessibility Guideline require a human being to be validated. So a test automated can only cover a small portion of the Web Content Accessibility Guideline. So it needs to be used in a wise way.
Next up, is there a guide on text to image ratio for emails? Not that I'm aware of in terms of accessibility. There might be out in the broader marketing sphere. I would say that for every image you're using, you want text to back it up. You don't want to give any message only through the image, because then you're going to probably fall into the image of text problem, because you're using it to actually convey some meaningful information. So for any image, I would have text that goes with it. Would be my simple rule of thumb for that.
Yeah, nothing to add here.
Is the way saying, quote, "you will see your updated information under" inappropriate, considering that users with vision impairments cannot see it? I was talking with one of the people that we work with here at UsableNet, who is blind, uses a screen reader, and we were talking about spatial, the idea of identifying things by spatial location. While left and right isn't really helpful, what he said was that above and below kind of work, because the above are things that have come before, and the under or below are things that are going to come after. So in some ways, you could potentially use under, because that kind of idea of above and below translate. But if you can do something that's just more specific, you will see your updated information and then identify whatever section the updated information is in, and update it, indicate that section by what it's labeled. That way everybody knows where that section is. And again, even saying, updated information in, name of the section below, you still know the name of the section so people know where to go with that.
Yeah, and maybe you want to replace C with find, so you will find your updated information. We don't necessarily need to overthink about harding sensitivity. Unfortunately, people with disabilities are used to a common language that is not very inclusive. It is the world changing. So anything we can do to be more inclusive, yeah, let's do it. So I would replace C with find, but it won't. If there is the C verb, it won't be a dramatic problem, in my opinion. At least, my opinion is based on conversations, of course, I had with our colleague and other people that are part of the disabled community.
And next up, and I think this is the last question that I see in the Q&A. I'm struggling with helping the leaders at my company understand accessibility to create accessible documents and website. Do you have any tips for how to initiate the conversation with people who may be dismissive or resistant? I have so many things I could say on that topic that it's an entire other webinar to do. I've actually done a webinar for UsableNet talking about specifically how to start having these conversations at your company. And I've also been doing a blog series for UsableNet on this very topic as well. So I'm going to put the link to this, the blog series, in the chat for this, because it's a bit of a long one to try to read out and make it make sense. But I'll put that in over there, and those blogs also connect to my webinar there. So hopefully that can help you kind of kickstart some more meaningful conversations within your own organization. Because it does, you just got to keep chipping away at it. I mean, it sounds difficult to do that, but if you're meeting resistance in some quarters, look for allies in other areas. And the more champions you can create and help them understand, you know, the exclusion that happens to your audience when you've got inaccessible documents and websites, the more champions you build, hopefully you can start to win over those who are dismissive and resistant.
If you want a quick statement, more than 20% of your potential customers will have a disability. That is statistic. And that 20% doesn't include the elders. I mean, the web population is getting older and older. So, and getting older, you will not certify as a disabled person, but you might need to, to enlarge the text, the font of your personal computer. Potentially, you might need to apply a different color scheme. Is my site reacting well to these changes? That's accessibility. So there is definitely a business case to focus on accessibility beside the ethical, the doing the right thing aspect or the legal aspect.
And that's everything I have in the Q&A. Malcolm, do you have anything for us from the chat? We're actually maybe out of time.
We are running up to the top of the hour, but I think all of the questions in the chat were covered as well. Just give one last check, and I can go ahead and share your and Michele's contact as well in the chat if anyone has any follow-up questions. And I want to just thank you and Michele both once again for such a great presentation. It was wonderful to see so many questions in the Q&A from our audience and people joining from all over. So once again, thank you for being part of our mini series. And I also want to thank our support team today, Denise and Brenna, for such a lovely job. Thank you for your work as always. And for upcoming IAAP webinars, we have on July 20th, using a risk management lens to manage accessibility at scale. And that's part of our digital accessibility series. And then on July 27th, we have the next webinar of our An Accessibility Journey mini-series, In the Thick of It, a comprehensive approach to accessibility and inclusive design. And then closing out the series on August 3rd, we have Staying on the Right Path, the Princeton Approach, Designing and Sustaining an Effective Digital Accessibility Program. Once again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And for those of you who are not yet an IAAP member, we welcome you to join our network of over 5,500 accessibility professionals in over 100 countries. All IAAP members get discounts on live webinars, complimentary access to our library of archived webinars, access to our Connections networking platform, free courses, and more. Sign up today at www.accessibilityassociation.org or email info@accessibilityassociation.org to see how you can become an IAAP member today. Once again, thank you to Jeff and Michele, and I hope everyone has a lovely rest of their day.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Malcolm.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great day.